So we're going to do a very informal sermon today. As many of you know, for Lent, we've been journeying through what we call the sacred journey. Really, it's the journey within. We've been using this tool called the Enneagram to help us. It's a tool. It's a map, if you will, to help us understand ourselves and other people a little bit better. On the next slide, for those of you who this is the first time and you're like, I'm not sure what the Enneagram is, here's the symbol, really. It looks a little odd at first. Ennea just means 9, and gram means pointed drawing or drawing. So it's a 9-pointed drawing. The understanding here is we are all of these types. But from a very young age, we tend to gravitate more towards one. And bless you. and bless you again.
You've run out of your blessings, kid.
Wow, that was harsh. Bless you.
I knew it was going to keep going.
Yeah, you kind of fished for that one, huh? Where were we? We're going to have fun today with this.
He told me I could interject,
yes.
So now he might be regretting this.
Yes. So during this whole sermon series, for Lent, for those of you who aren't familiar with Lent, it's the 40 days minus the Sundays leading up to Easter. Christians reflect on this time as the 40 days Jesus spent in the wilderness praying, fasting. Oftentimes Christians will fast or pray, and really it's a journey within, like disconnect a little bit from the world. Some people give up things like social media or other stuff to kind of have a moment to really dive in and do some self-examining. So we've been using the Enneagram as that tool. We've gone through all of the 9 types. So today what we're going to do is explore a little bit deeper and then talk about spiritual formation. So on the next slide, I believe, there we go. We've already talked about your type, finding your type. Again, you have all types, but you gravitate towards one type in particular, and we've kind of talked about how those are similar and different. The next steps, today what we're going to talk about is finding your wing and finding your subtype. And then we're going to talk about spiritual formation, what it is, how do you use the Enneagram for that. And we also have done a survey of what are the Enneagram types represented at one church. So we're going to reveal that. Angie's going to reveal that here in a few moments, which is exciting. Yay. So next slide, we're going to be back to the image of the Enneagram. What is your wing? Your wing, this is really, really easy. Some people get confused because you take a test online and they'll often give you your top 2 or 3 numbers. Anybody done that where it's like like I'm a 6 with a 2 wing and a 8 wing or something like that. It's confusing. It's really trying to give your dominant type first. So once you hone in on that, for example, I'm a type 9, the peacemaker. Woo. I don't know what that was.
You're excited about making peace.
Yeah, peace. Once you find your dominant type, your wing is just those numbers adjacent to your dominant type. So some people will say you have 2 wings. Some people will resonate more with the 1. For example, I'm a 9 with a 1 week. Dennis kind of talked about this last week when he was talking about he's a 7 with an 8 wing. All that means is really it's the second type. It's kind of like your subtype. It's the second one that you most kind of gravitate towards. You could think of it like this. You see that if you look at the 9 and you see that little green arrow, that's where 9s go to in health, towards the 3. But if you kind of put a dot right at like that point of that green arrow, that's where I would kind of tend to sit, would be that 9 with the 1 wing. So the wing kind of influences you. Somebody asked a question. By the way, on our online survey, some people posted all kinds of different questions. You can go on our online Facebook community. You might have to scroll down a little bit. If you're a part of One Church and you're not a part of our online Facebook group, please seek us out, One Church Facebook online community. We interact there, have fun, and explore different things. But people ask all kinds of different questions. I kind of engaged in some of those questions there and invited other people to do the same. You are welcome to disagree with me. I know, that can be scary. I don't have all the answers. I don't know all the answers. I was about to say I don't know what I'm talking about half the time, but
that's not true.
That might not be the best promo for this morning. Like, why are we here then? Let's get out of here and go somewhere else. But you're free to interact and say, oh, this is how I see it. Actually, I kind of see it this way. So I want to let you guys know. But one of the questions was, somebody was exploring and they're like, I feel like I resonate with two types. If that's true and they're next to each other, for example, I resonated for a while with a lot of types, but one of them was the 1. And so I was like, well, am I a 1 or a 9? And it's getting back at that core motivation. Again, if you're joining us, I apologize. This is a whole new language, so we're just touching on some of this. But for those of you who have been joining us, getting at that core motivation. So 1's core motivation is to improve, to see what needs or what can improve, which I'm like that in some situations, for sure. And 9's is really the seeking wholeness and peace, and because of that, they kind of avoid conflict. And so I debated both for a while, and what really helped me was just finding descriptions of both, and then sending them out to other people who were like, yeah, you're definitely a 9. Like, my 1 shows up, unfortunately, towards my wife at times when it comes to like the house and everything in order and everything can improve. Not to say that she's like a housewife who does all the cleaning, because that's not, yeah, we share in that role. But that's where my 1 kind of comes out at times. Did I just dig myself in a really big hole? All right, let's see how we can go from here. So that is the wings. It's just one of those, sometimes both. If you're like, I find I resonate with both of those two adjacent, it's probably because you have both wings that really influence you. And that, I think, is actually a healthy thing. Some people suggest that in your second half of life, that you develop the other wing as you grow in that. And so that's just some further digging into the Enneagram. So, subtypes.
Yeah, well, a side note on the wing, I can really relate to that because I went back and forth between am I a 2, am I a 3, am I a 2, am I a 3? And then it made sense because they're wings of each other, so it really made sense that chances are I have a lot of both. And then what really ended up being the key factor for me finding my type was Aaron actually mentioned digging into subtypes. And I was like, wait, now there's a whole other thing? Like, this is already complicated. What are we talking about? So in addition to this, there's 3 instinctual subtypes for each type, which makes up 27 types. And I know some of you are like, wait, what? And it's based on, so according to psychiatrist Claudio Naranjo, he developed this theory that basically, which was fascinating, he blended both psychotherapy and spirituality, which is great. To incorporate mental health with spirituality, I think, is a beautiful thing. And he developed this theory that evolution as humans, that we have required 3 survival strategies. And that's how we get these subtypes. It's 3 ways we have learned to survive and adapt. So these 3 strategies, or basic instincts, are these 3 different things. 1 would be self-preservation, which basically governs our needs for material supplies, security, including food, shelter, warmth, and family relations. The other one is social, which governs our needs for belonging and membership within the larger group and community. And the other one is one-to-one, sometimes called sexual. Some people get weird over that word. I don't. But if you do, one-to-one is good for you. Governs our sexuality, intimate relationships, and close friendships, and the vitality of the life force within our bodies. Okay. So you might be going, wait, what does this mean? Basically what this means is we've learned not only how to adapt and be our type, but then within that type, we've learned different ways to be that thing. So you might be a 9 or a 2 and sit next to a whole bunch of 9s or 2s and look very different. And it's because even within your type, you've learned different ways to self-preserve or be social or bond with each other. And so with this, we have all of them. You're not going to just be one. You're going to have them all, but they call it an instinctual stack. So basically, you have all, your dominant one's going to be at the top, and this is the one that you're going to be using the most. This sounds confusing, but this is the thing that helped me find my type. Because I kept reading about 2s, I kept testing as a 3 with a 2 wing, I'd read about the motivation for 3, and I went, that doesn't feel quite right. So I read more about 2s, and I'm like, oh, the motivation does, but the characteristics of a lot of the 2s don't feel quite right. So I started digging in deeper, and it was actually this book. If any of you are Enneagram nerds or fascinated by this, there's this book by Beatrice Chestnut. She's got a great name. It's called The Complete Enneagram, and it's 27 paths to greater knowledge. And see, hers focuses on the individual 27 paths. So instead of just 9, it then breaks it down into, okay, now that you've got your type, how are you moving within that type? And that's when I read and discovered there's a subtype of a 2 that looks a lot like a 3. It still has the motivations of wanting to be needed. It still has the motivations of, I'm going to suppress my needs, and I really need you to affirm me. But it's going to look more like that 3 of achiever type of persona. So that helps a lot of people that might be a little bit gray, and I'm not quite sure. You start to read about the subtypes, and that really kind of opens things up a bit.
Yeah, I think you can also, I mean, without getting the book, you can kind of Google and find out some, and read about different things, and they'll manifest differently. Like I'm a social 9, which is the most 2-ish 9.
Right.
So it's the most like extroverted in certain roles. So it reflects differently. By the way, completely off topic, and not to embarrass you at all, but many people think that Jesus was a type 2. So compete with
Jesus.
that. Go Jesus. Sorry.
No, I've heard that said before, that Jesus might be a type 2, and I obviously can see that. You know, Jesus gave literally everything, even to the point of death. But what's fascinating is also the concept that Christ embodies God, which should be all. So Jesus also is such a peacemaker, really, extreme peacemaker. So you start to see these things in him that reflect all 9 types. So not totally off topic. This is going to be fun. We normally do stuff that's very structured, and now we're like, oh, let's be relaxed this morning. How do we do that?
Dangerous. Everybody else is like, we know what they normally do and how long that usually takes. So
this is true. We won't do that to you.
We got Travis back there with flashcards that's going to let us know when we're like running out of time and then when the time's up. So
next, should we dive into revealing?
Yeah, I think so. This was fascinating, drawing people. Where does one church kind of gravitate towards?
Yeah. We'll go ahead and put up that slide, the pie chart of the results. Shocking.
Yay, 9s.
We've got a ton of 9s. Now, we've been having this discussion. Do we have a lot of 9s because Aaron's a 9? And it's kind of normal in any organization that you tend to kind of mirror your leadership, and 2 is the next number, so that would be kind of ironic. Yet, you know, one church's founding pastor was a 3, and I know at the time we actually still had a lot of 9s. So we've been talking about what might that mean as far as, is 9 a more common number? Is 9 because of our tradition here at one church? But if you're a 4 and you thought you were unique, I'm sorry, but you're not as unique as you thought. You are what, the 3rd highest number.
That was surprising to me.
It was.
Because they're one of the more rare ones. So it's interesting when you think like, oh, we're just talking. Like, why is that? It would be curious to know, like, is it because 4s want to go deep and they tend to be on the fringe of a lot of movements and different things? And so are they attracted to places like communities like one church where that's more okay? And could it be 9s that kind of are in the gray area? Or 1s that are like, no, we need to reform things. We see what's right, we see what's wrong, and they're a part of it. Yeah, I don't know.
No, that's interesting, because I can see how all of these types play out in our community in different ways. And with anything, and now this isn't a personality typing tool like Myers-Briggs, but I will say the Enneagram still can be extremely useful in teams and groups and leadership. And so we start to see, oh, we don't have a lot of these types of people. Well, how do we connect with these types of people in doing things to help us be more holistic, more well-rounded? So 9s, you guys win. If there was a contest,
Yay.
You win.
We win. And there's no one that lost, so we can't point out to your type, because it's like a 5 or 6 way, 3s, 5s, 6s, 7s, and 8s all tied. They had the exact same number of people that said, I'm this type, which is interesting.
Yeah, which is very interesting. So that's kind of the makeup if you will, of our church, which is fascinating because I really think that also kind of reflects our core values, which really is on love and inclusion. And 2s and 9s are all about love and inclusion. Not that the rest aren't. You guys are too, wholeheartedly. But it makes sense that that's the root, that's the core that you're drawn to. So with that, do we want to pivot and talk about spiritual formation?
Yes, we will. And by the way, we had, I think, 97 people partake of that. So it's a good amount. That's a good survey for us. Of our community. So I think that's a pretty good example of probably where we are, which if you're like me, it's like, that's interesting. So spiritual formation. If there was any one particular topic that I'm probably most passionate about, most interested, it would be spiritual formation. In seminary, that was my emphasis. But it can be this vague, what is spiritual formation? In one regard, spiritual formation, it can be very much discipleship. That same word, interacting. Although for a lot of us, we grew up in traditions where certain words now are triggering. 'Cause discipleship means something that really doesn't represent what I'm talking about, so I like the word spiritual formation. Discipleship used to mean you read your Bible and you pray every day and you go to church and you don't cuss and then you're good. It's a transactional thing. Anybody grow up with that song, read your Bible, pray every day, and you'll grow? No?
Why don't you teach it to us,
A couple, that was like kindergarten. And we start off as little bitty shoots, and then we grow. So I was trained, man, you just read your Bible, pray, and you're good. There probably is some aspects to that. What I like about this word really is formation. It simply just means, how are we formed as spiritual beings? And that's kind of where I start, is we're all spiritual beings on this path, on this journey. And I also think everything is spiritual. So how are we formed? And I like this image. It might be triggering for some people. I apologize if that is for you. It's the potter and the clay. And this idea for me is God is sort of the potter and we are the clay. And I know this can seem harsh and God's forcing us into a certain thing. Or it can say, for me, it reflects this idea, we're all different sizes and shapes of clay. And the Spirit of God works with us to form us. And the point, I think, isn't what we look like. Do we all look the same? Uniformity is never the point. If you just look around this world, you're like, obviously, God's not about uniformity. It's about diversity. And so we don't all need to look alike. We might be tall, short, whatever. We might be a plate. We might be whatever. But the point is that God, I think, the Spirit of God, hi, Noah. I just felt like he was waving at me. We had a moment right there. We were like, man, this guy's ADD up here. Where God is the one that's forming us. But I do think we play a role in that. And the role that we play is we consent to that or we resist it. And we all do both all the time, often without realizing. And I think spiritual practices, the main goal or reason spiritual practices exist is to open us up to consent to what the Spirit is doing. And if you're not a person of faith, it's just opening yourself up to what the universe is doing. And you can resist it. And God might, would you bend here a little bit? Nope, I'm not ready for that. And here's the thing that I think matters the most for me, is I don't think God's in a hurry. Nor do I think God gets mad if we're just like, I'm not ready for that. And I think, okay, well, let's work on something else. And I guarantee you we'll come back to that later, and then we'll see again. Are you ready for this? And it's a slow process of the potter working with the clay to mold and to allow it to become what it is. So what does the Enneagram say about spiritual formation and spiritual growth? We've got all kinds of books up here today.
Yours has glitter all over it.
I know. It has green, sparkly glitter.
I love it.
That's what happens when you have little kids. I'm like, thanks for that, guys. This book is called The Sacred Enneagram, written by Christopher Huertz. He and his wife worked a nonprofit all over the world. They worked actually in Calcutta with Mother Teresa. For a time, they started a center for contemplative activism. And this book dives into more of the spirituality behind the Enneagram. The book that we've been reading and going through in our small group, The Road Back to You, is a great introductory primer, or as Ian says, primer. This is perfect to get to kind of get your feet wet and get to know about it. And this just dives in deep with that. And he suggests in his book, which I agree, he says the paramount question plaguing humanity has to do with identity. Each person struggles with the question of who am I? Fundamentally. Now think about this. Sorry, I had to adjust this a couple times. It was like creeping up. I have 2 young boys, so I watch a lot of kids' movies, and I love kids' movies. But think about the quest for the protagonist to find out who they are. So Zootopia. Anybody watch that movie, Zootopia? Right? You got a rural bunny who's supposed to be this farmer, but feels within her, no, I want to be this police officer. So she moves to this urban area and discovers herself. But in that discovery, in all of these movies, it takes an enormous amount of pain and suffering, and you jig and you jag, and you're like, I don't know. But something within her feels called to do that thing. Moana. Anybody see the movie Moana? Right? I am on this island, and yet something within me, the sea, pulls me out to realize more of who I am. Coco. Anybody see Coco? I don't have any adult films, sorry. But Coco, you have this 12-year-old boy. I realize that could have been taken a couple different ways now. I probably shouldn't, yeah. All right, Coco, 12-year-old boy who I am a musician. I am born to play. I am born to be this, but music is banned in their house, and we find out from that movie for multiple generations. And he is on this quest. He discovers actually that it's in his blood, his DNA, who his father was, who is this songer, songwriter person, and somebody else actually stole their music. So it's all about who they are, their identity. If you go back, especially the older Disney movies, you find out that they discover ultimately they were a prince or princess. It's that journey of discovering, which is interesting because I think it's a very deep theological journey of finding out the divine dwells within all of us. What is our intrinsic value and worth, and finding that out. And so today, 40 days of Lent, we've been talking about that. Jesus spends in the wilderness. I think a lot of what Jesus was doing in that time was finding out who he was, disconnecting from everything else. So he was baptized, and then we read in the Gospels he was led by the Spirit out. Now what's interesting is, first of all, Mark, which was the first gospel to be written, doesn't talk much about it. Mark writes this, and the Spirit immediately drove Jesus into the wilderness, and he was in the wilderness for 40 days, tempted by Satan, and he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. That's it. That's all it goes. It's actually Matthew and Luke who kind of elaborate more. So Satan comes in and says, oh, you can turn this stone into bread. Oh, if you worship me, then I'll give you these kingdoms. Oh, if you jump off of this, then God will save you. And scholars disagree. Was that literal? Is this a parable? And for us, I know in this room, and we talk a lot about construction, deconstruction, reconstruction. For me, going through, and I was always taught Satan was this fallen angel, right? Often with a pitchfork and a little tail, I'm out to get you. And going through and seeing kind of the flow of where that came from within the Judeo-Christian tradition, and then questioning that. Here, we invite those questions. And I have my own thoughts about it, but what I came to the conclusion is this: evil exists. Now, whether it's Satan or we sort of, big word here, let me see if I can get it, anthropomorphized evil. Yeah, good. Cha-ching. Anthropomorphized evil. To me, I'm not sure that it really matters. Evil exists. It's a powerful force, and we need to resist it. I also experience it really a lot within me, and that it's the yin and the yang. right? And so I read this story and probably maybe Jesus experienced that within, this temptation to power, to fame, to whatever it was, dealing with that, finding his root identity and living from that. No, this is what I am called to do. And of course, we talked about this last week of engaging and disengaging, and Jesus doing that often. He went out and he fed this multitude, and then he withdrew. It's like, wait, I got to be careful here because they all want and expect something from me, and I need to be careful that I'm connecting to God, to source, to who I am, and to walking into that and living from that place. So I have an illustration of what that means. Do you have anything along that to add?
I mean, I have some thoughts on identity, but I can get to that later. The illustration, let's stick with that.
All right, and then I'll come back to you. So what does this mean for the 9? Actually, first thing, what is interesting, too, about the Enneagram is actually you're not your type. So we tricked you. You are not your type. These are actually 9 ways we give ourselves illusions. 9 different sort of masks we wear. 9 ways that we walk away from who we are. So on the next slide, in this book, Christopher Huertz, he writes this: the Enneagram illustrates the 9 ways we get lost, but also the 9 ways we come home to our true self. Or to put another way, it exposes the 9 ways we lie to ourselves about who we think we are, 9 ways we can come clean about those illusions, and 9 ways we can find our way back to God. And so when the book says find our way, what does it say? The road back to you? The road back to you, the road back to source, the road back to your identity, the road back to God. I think they're saying the same things, using different languages here. And Angie hit on this a few weeks ago, this idea that our personalities come from the word persona, almost these masks we wear. And we all wear them. It's just different shapes and sizes and ways. So for the 9, knowing my Enneagram and following it through. By the way, the Enneagram really is a map. It's not the journey. It can help, but you can't mistake the map for the journey, right? Several years ago, I bought tickets to go down to the Grand Canyon to spend the night, overnight, and I bought this map and I laid out where I was going to go. And then I never went. So I can't go. So the map didn't really do me any good, right? It's actually the journey. So some of you, especially if you're in your second half of life, 40s and 50s and 60s, may look at the Enneagram like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. I already knew a lot of that. Because you've been taking this journey for a while, right? And so you look back and you're like, oh, that map kind of makes a little bit of sense because I've already been on this. So how the map helped me for 9s, 2 things. There's a lot of things that stood out to me, but 2 things that I wrote down that really got to my core is that 9s can often overlook themselves and they feel unimportant. How many of you will, if you're a 9, will say, yeah, a lot of my life I felt unimportant or inadequate? Any 9s want to raise their hand and say me? Okay. All right, so this speaks to something, right? This speaks to you, hopefully, in a way. So that spoke to me. The work that I did, it's ongoing, the work that I continue to do all the time, is a lot of it was what I call inner work, or some people have called shadow work. Really, shadow is that part of us that we all have that we pretend like we don't. It's that part of us where we're like, yeah, I'm not sure that I like this, and often it can remain unconscious or hidden. It's kind of a hidden motivation from us. Everybody following me? So for me, I was like, what is that for me? I was seeing a spiritual director. I was trying to work through this stuff. I'm like, okay, I know I have a shadow. Just what is it? And so I was talking to my spiritual director and just answering questions, trying to work this up. And I'll never forget the moment. I should have brought tissue, so I'll do this slow. Where it just hit me. I feel inadequate. And when you get to the core of your shadow, which I think is, again, sort of never ending, but it feels like the mask is kind of, or part of the mask is being pulled off. And I think I still wear masks. I don't want to pretend like, oh, I got my mask off, here I am. Just removing part of it. It feels both almost vulnerable and humiliating to some extent, like, oh, here I am. and also deeply healing. And I just remember just crying and like, why is this such a big deal? And what I realized is I stuff that down of the feeling of inadequacy, and then I try to overwork to compensate, which creates more and more stress because you're never, ever good enough. And so for me, it helped as a 9, realizing, number one, I am unconditionally loved and accepted for who I am. And I probably think that's true for all of our types. That should be the core motivating thing that we all rest on for all of our types. We are loved and accepted as we are. Richard Rohr says we are already in the flow. Unfortunately, for a lot of religion and different things, it's a transaction where you got to do more. You got to be better. Now, you are who you are, deeply loved. And then the second thing that helped me in this sort of formation process was this idea that I am enough. Brene Brown, man, she killed it. I am enough. So for a 9, it's easy for us 9s to kind of blend in, be in the background. I don't need to voice my opinion. I don't need to cause any conflict. It's safer, more secure, more comfortable back here. And so the work of the 9 is to step out. I am enough. I'm not perfect. I'm not the best, and I don't have to be. I can be a good husband, and I can be a good father. And instead of looking at all the other husbands and fathers and me thinking, oh, if only I was them, that would be great. Another way it came out for me was as a pastor, a 9 pastor. Well, I'm not a super charismatic 7. So you saw Dennis up here last week. Oh, I was laughing the whole time. I wish I could be that way sometimes. But that's not me. Again, core identity, who am I? That's what we're walking into. And I know, and I asked Talia if I could share this, so she said yes. But Talia, I know, is also a 9 and has a consistent job, but feeling called and drawn, doing the hard work of this is what I want to do as a 9, and stepping out and say, I would like to start a business on my own, which is really intimidating for a 9. You're stepping out and moving out into the world. You're showing up and say, I matter, and this is what I want to do. That's the healing work for the 9, and you can do that all across your board. The neat thing about this is that there's different ways that we do our own work. For some of us, we serve all the time. That's natural. It just comes to us. Maybe stopping for a second, spending some time not serving, and just sitting. Who am I apart from that? Some of us may be doing that all the time. We're always introspecting. And jumping out of that and serving might be the thing. For some types, we sit in the pain forever, and moving out of that pain may be most helpful. For other types, we're quick to move out, and sitting within that pain may be really helpful. One of my favorite stories is Moses when he encounters God in the burning bush. And Moses gives all these excuses to God not to send him. He says, I'm just a lowly shepherd. Who am I? And God says, I'll be with you. And Moses said, I don't really know who you are. And God says, I am who I am. Tell them, well, that doesn't really clear it up. Thanks for that. What if they don't believe me? Well, throw your staff on. It turns into a snake. Stick your hand in your shirt, and out comes this leprous. Well, I stutter. I'm not a good speaker. Well, take Aaron. Right? He gave all the excuses in the book, but moved out. And that's how I feel sometimes as a 9. I'm sure if you're a 9, you relate, and maybe if you're not, you relate in those aspects as well. So these stories, I think, are potent because they reflect some parts of us, and we find those ourselves in these stories. One of my favorite quotes from Rumi, a Sufi mystic, is this: if you are here unfaithfully with us, you are causing terrible damage. Again, it gets back to this identity. I don't need to be like Angie, even though she's super hip and cool and a great communicator. And every time we go out, I don't know how you do this, because maybe you get the same thing. Every time we're at a restaurant, there's like 2 people that says, we love your hair, it's so cool. I'm like, what about mine? Isn't it cool too? The world doesn't need another Angie. It needs me to be who I am, the pastor that I am, the husband that I am, the father, just like it needs you to be who you are. It's the well-known saying, there was a rabbi named Zusia. Many of you probably heard this before, who was coming to the end of his life, and he says, in the coming world, They will not ask me, why were you not Moses? They will ask me, why were you not Zeusia?
I was literally going to quote that.
Well, there you
stole
go.
my
Sorry.
quote. It is so good. What you just said, I want people to rest with that for a minute. First of all, the Enneagram, some of you might be like, thank goodness this is the last Enneagram. Let's get on to the next. And that's cool too. You're allowed to feel that way. You can feel that way. For some of you, this has caused a lot of deep introspection on who you are. And I want you to kind of sit with that for a moment, that the goal is not, you're not good enough, you have to change. The goal is not, I need to work harder, I need to be better. The goal is just becoming more you. That's really, and that was so good. I want that to sit for a minute, because we can often feel like, especially maybe those with some real traditional Christian roots, can kind of start to feel like, well, wait a minute. Is this kind of like just a different version of legalism, where now I have to be this way, act this way, do this, do that? The goal is really to stop and pay attention to who you are, who God created you to be, and to step further into that. That doesn't mean that you have to do X, Y, and Z to be perfect. The goal is not even about perfect. And he talked about the persona, which was something I noted, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because I made a note to dive into that again, that we wear this mask of false identity, and we all do it in different ways. And spiritual writer Henry Nouwen identified 3 lies of our identity, of what we think our identity is. And some of you may have heard this before. The first would be, I am what I have. The second is, I am what I do. And the third is, I am what others say about me. And I don't know about you, but I have thought that about myself, all 3 of those points. Whether that's the stuff we own, the jobs that we have, I am what I do. I will tell you personally, I've wrestled with this so hard. I don't share this story often, but I used to be I guess it sounds weird to say it, but a professional musician, and that's what I did. That was my career. And I had vocal damage that changed the course of my life, and I wrestled with, who am I? And that was the core of me going, who am I? Because I thought this was me. I thought that's who I was. And so then I started to wrestle with, well, gosh, if you take this away and you take that away and you take all these parts of me, what's left of Angie? What's my real core identity? And then I am what other people say about me. Well, clearly what I do creates what people say about me. If I can't do that thing, then what are people saying about me? And it caused this struggle, and I believe this philosophy that struggle is an invitation for growth. And we can either step in and join in and grow, or we can resist, and we do sometimes, but just know that often that invitation comes along in some other form, in some other way. And we're given this invitation, hey, do you want to grow? Hey, do you want to grow? Let's change, let's be better. And I started to step into this invitation during that time of struggle and realized my identity really, those are facets of my persona, but my identity is here. My identity is what the divine creator of all things says about me. And so if you're type 5, an Enneagram type 5, you might be quick to say, I am what I have. Because we learned that type 5s can be somewhat possessive of their things. And not out of a look what I have, but out of this greed, because I need to take care of this. And if you're an Enneagram type 3, you might be quick to say, I am what I do. Look at me perform and achieve. If you're an Enneagram type 9, you're probably quick to say, I am what other people say about me. And you see this in all of our identities. But true identity is found in the creator of all things, whose divine love simply says, I love you because I love you, because I love you, because I love you, because I love you. That's it. Because you are loved. And I think there's this beautiful quote, continuing on Henry Nouwen's thoughts. He has this incredible quote that says, claim your belovedness. What is said of Jesus is said of you. You and I are the beloved sons and daughters of God. Claim it. Make it your own. Make it your own. So if you're a one, you represent the goodness of God. Twos represent the love of God. Threes, the glory of God. Fours, the creativity of God. Fives, the wisdom of God. Sixes, the loyalty of God. Sevens, the joy of God. Eights, the justice of God. And nines, the peace of God. And you can see when we step into this, we can get in this rat race of bettering ourselves. And maybe the thing is to pause and reflect and say, what are ways I can just be? What are ways that I can just be? And I can also be in awareness to these things that call to my attention a way of not being my true self. And for me, if I'm being very honest, the Enneagram, I learned about it a few years ago and was like, cool, and didn't really apply it. Truthfully, I was like, oh, neat, that's awesome. I also know about the Myers-Briggs. I also know about the color code. I also know about, and that's how I kind of grouped it. It was sort of like this other personality test. This time around, diving in deep and really discovering the motivations, and I've been hearing some of you talk about the motivations of your type. Discovering that did something deep within me. You can ask my wife. I probably freaked out for about a month or two, just going into this, oh my God, do I do this thing? I do this thing? How? I thought I was just such a good person. And I have this icky motive underneath, and why? And then discovering, oh, but wait, I've learned this from a long time ago on how to adapt and how to be in the world. But what does God say? What does the divine ask us? Just to be. And so then it's drawing an awareness instead of, at first it was critical. So if you're that person, and a 1 might be more drawn to being this way, other numbers might be more drawn to being this way too. If you start getting real critical, I get it. I was there. But then you step into, I see this thing that's going on in me, and why do I do that thing? And then now I'm in this phase of kind of, and it's hard, trying to relinquish I don't need to do that thing. And it's hard, letting go. And so I'll notice this key behavior. Let me step in and save. Let me rescue. Let me do this. And then I can stop and go, but why am I doing that right now? Is it because I want to deeply, or is it because I think I need this affirmation from someone? So depending on your type, you'll have this thing that you do. And stopping and going, well, wait, why? Do I need to do that thing? And then relinquishing control, and it's scary. It's scary to go, I don't need to be that way. All I need to be is me. I need to be me, the person that God formed and created, that we were beautifully, fearfully, and wonderfully made, as is. And that was the biggest thing that I've gotten out of this whole thing, that no matter your Enneagram type, that we see this as a path towards growth, as a path towards awareness. And that personal change requires self-awareness and wisdom. And I'll leave you at least with this, that in Proverbs 4, verses 6 through 7, it says, do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it cost you all you have, get understanding. So my thoughts is maybe be a community that searches not for certainty, right, but deep understanding. And not for perfection, but wholeness. Does that make sense? Not being perfect, but being whole. And I think the two are very different messages, but have this understanding and having this integrated wholeness. So that's kind of what I've taken away from this incredible journey, really. Any thoughts, Aaron?
Yeah, that was really good. I think, I know, wasn't that good thoughts? Good thought. Yeah, that was really good. I want to invite the worship team to come back up, and a few things. we could only do so much when we do 2 types every Sunday, and you're like, how do we do it in like 20 minutes and give people an idea of what we're talking about as well as spiritual growth and hopefully some idea of biblical characters or examples, like 20 minutes, and we always went over every week. But part of this, we hope you can dive deeper in the small groups, which are wrapping up, but also on April 22nd. It's a Sunday after the service, and the food hall will have an event. We'll gather around tables with other people of your type and discuss what you learned, what you didn't learn, well, you can't discuss what you didn't learn, but what you felt like resonated, what you felt like didn't resonate, different scenarios and things for you. So there's ways to dive deeper. That's just so limiting on like a 20-minute increment. But as we switch to worship, I thought it would be neat to do something. If we want to turn off the backlights. And what I like about this, it's a map. So we're done with this map for a while, at least here. And you can take it or leave it. I don't think it matters that much. If it's a helpful map, great. If it's not helpful, it's okay. But I think one of the things that it's pointed to and what Angie kind of led to is it's about wholeness and where we are. And so I want to invite us as we worship to think about what is God, what is the Spirit inviting us into at this season in our life? What do we feel invited to consent to surrender to? And so maybe if it's all right with you, Angie, I don't know if you can play something a little bit, but we'll take a few minutes and maybe point out certain things that maybe God is inviting us to consent to. And the thing is, it could look so radically different. That's why I hate uniformity, because for some people, it might be a season of just sit. So I want to invite you to close your eyes, and we'll throw out different things. But for you, at this season, what is God inviting you to consent, to surrender? What does it look like for you? Is God inviting you to surrender a relationship? Is God inviting you to just rest? You've been working and working. Is God inviting you to just rest? And what does that mean? Is God inviting you to take a leap, to be courageous in an area of your life, and to step out in trust and faith?
Is God inviting you towards self-care? Is God inviting you to recognize that you have your own needs and wants?
Is God inviting you to see the sacred in the ordinary, to value the dirty diaper or the laundry?
Is God inviting you to see your worth? Which is hard because it often comes from within.
Is God inviting you into deeper community, which can be scary, giving of yourself in more vulnerable ways? Is
God inviting you to let go, to release control of whatever that situation or whatever that thing is in your life. But to release, to let go of micromanaging and step back and rest.
So God, I'm inviting you into greater mystery, beyond the certainty.